I buried my sister 32 years ago. Her name was Jennifer. Jenny, we called her. She was 19 when the charter tour bus she was on skidded off the Sea-to-Sky highway during a sudden October ice storm. The news reports said 15 passengers died that night. Jenny was one of them. I identified her body at the morgue in Squamish. I was 23 years old and I had to tell our mother that her only daughter was gone. Last Tuesday, my phone rang at 2:00 in the morning. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was 604 Vancouver. I almost didn't answer. At 55, you learn that nothing good comes from calls at that hour, but something made me reach for it. Maybe it was the same instinct that used to wake me when Jenny had nightmares as a kid. Her small voice calling for her big brother. I answered. A voice, fragile and thin, said, "Michael? Is this Michael?" I sat up in bed, my heart suddenly pounding against my ribs. The voice was uncertain, like someone who hadn't spoken their own name in a very long time. But underneath that rasp, there was a ghost of a tone, a melodic quality that made my blood run cold. "Who is this?" I asked. There was breathing on the other end, shallow, scared. "It's me," the voice said. "It's Jenny. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where are you watching from. It helps more than you know." I dropped the phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pick it up again. When I did, the line was still open. I could hear her breathing. "This isn't funny," I said, my voice cracking. "Whoever you are, this is sick. My sister died 32 years ago." "I know," the voice whispered. "I know how long it's been. I just figured out who I am. I found something, a newspaper clipping about the bus crash. And there's a picture of me, but the name under it says Jennifer Reed. That's me, isn't it? I'm Jennifer Reed." I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. "Where are you?" I managed to say. I don't really know. "A place called the downtown Eastside. Someone told me that's what it's called. I've been here a long time. I think I live in a shelter on East Hastings Street. But I don't remember. I don't remember how I got here. I don't remember anything before about 10 years ago. Just waking up in a hospital and they said I'd been found on the street and I didn't have any ID and I couldn't tell them my name. My mind was racing. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of cruel scam. "What do you remember?" I asked, testing her. "Nothing clear, just feelings. Sometimes I dream about ice, about sliding, about the sound of metal tearing, and sometimes I dream about a house with a willow tree in the backyard, and someone used to sing an old folk song. The water is wide." I felt the tears start then hot and sudden because I remembered that house. I remembered that willow tree. And I remembered our mother singing that very song to us every night before bed. Jenny always requested it. "What do you look like?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Old," she said. And there was a deep, profound sadness in that single word. "Tired. My hair is mostly gray. I've lived rough for a long time, but I found this picture in the newspaper from the accident. And even though it's 32 years old, I can see it. I can see myself in that face. We have the same nose." Jenny had a birthmark, I thought, a desperate gamble. On her right shoulder blade, a small strawberry-shaped birthmark. There was a long, suspended pause. I could hear her fumbling with fabric. Then a soft, broken sob. "I have a mark. Right there. I've always had it." I was crying now. Really crying in a way I hadn't cried since the day we buried her. "Give me your address," I said. "I'm coming to get you." "I don't think you should," she said quietly. I'm not the person you remember. I'm just a ghost. I just wanted someone to know that maybe I didn't die in that crash, that maybe there was a mistake. "Tell me where you are," I said, my voice firm, the big brother taking charge. "Right now." She gave me the address of a shelter on East Hastings. I wrote it down with shaking hands. It was a 7-hour drive from my home in Kelowna to Vancouver. Longer if the Coquihalla Pass was bad. I looked at the clock. 2:17 in the morning. "Stay there," I said. "Don't go anywhere. I'm leaving right now. I'll be there by noon at the latest. Do you understand? Don't leave." "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, Michael. I'll wait." The line went dead, but as Michael raced through the night toward a ghost, one terrifying question haunted him. If the woman in the shelter was really Jenny, who was the girl he had buried in her grave 32 years ago? The line went dead. Michael Reed sat frozen in the darkness of his Kelowna bedroom. the silence that followed the call somehow louder than the shocking words that had shattered it. For 30 seconds he was paralyzed, his mind unable to process the impossibility. Then a surge of adrenaline broke the spell. He was moving, a man on autopilot driven by a deep brotherly instinct that overrode all logic. He pulled on jeans and a flannel shirt, his hands fumbling with the buttons. The bedside lamp flicked on, casting a warm, concerned glow. His wife, Claire, stirred, her voice thick with sleep. "Michael, what's wrong? What time is it?" "I have to go to Vancouver," he said, his voice sounding distant and strange even to his own ears. He couldn't bring himself to look at her, to see the confusion and worry that would surely be in her eyes. "Now? At 2 in the morning? Michael, what's happened?" She sat up, the blankets pooling around her waist. He finally met her gaze. This woman he'd built a life with for 35 years, and the words felt like shards of glass in his throat. How do you tell someone that the foundational tragedy of your life, the immutable fact of your sister's death, has just been shattered by a ghost on the phone? "I'll explain later," he said, the words clipped. "I have to go. I'm sorry." He leaned over, kissed her forehead, and was out the door before she could form another question. The cold night air of the Okanagan Valley hit him like a physical slap. He slid into the driver's seat of his pickup truck, the familiar scent of old coffee and pine air freshener doing nothing to ground him. His hands were still trembling as he turned the key. The engine roared to life, a jarringly normal sound in the profound abnormality of the moment. He pulled out of the driveway and pointed the truck west towards the Coquihalla Highway. The drive was a 7-hour stretch of mountain road that was treacherous even in daylight. At this hour in late autumn, it was a gauntlet of darkness and potential black ice. He didn't care. He pushed the accelerator, the yellow lines of the highway becoming a hypnotic, continuous stream in his headlights. With the radio off, the only sound was the hum of the tires and the frantic whirl of his own thoughts. He was a 55-year-old man, a father of 2, a retired shop teacher. His life had been built on a bedrock of certainties. One of those certainties was that his bright, beautiful 19-year-old sister had died a tragic death in 1992. He had seen her body. He had signed the papers. He had held his sobbing mother at the funeral. What if he had been wrong? The memory of the morgue in Squamish surfaced, vivid and chilling. He was 23, trying to be the strong one for his devastated parents. The coroner had been gentle but firm. The body had been recovered from the wreckage after hours in the freezing water of the Howe Sound estuary. There was blunt force trauma to the face, swelling, discoloration from the cold, but the hair was the right shade of chestnut brown. The build was slight, like Jenny's. He remembered looking at the curve of the jaw, the shape of the hands, and through a veil of shock and gut-wrenching grief, he had nodded. "Yes," he'd whispered, his voice breaking. "That's her. That's Jenny. What if it wasn't?" The possibility was a vortex sucking down every stable part of his past. If that wasn't Jenny, then who was the girl they had buried? Who had that family been mourning all these years? And where had his real sister been? The voice on the phone had spoken of the downtown Eastside, of shelters, of a decade of not knowing her own name. The thought of Jenny, his kind, artistic little sister, living that kind of life for 32 years was a physical pain in his chest. He thought of their mother, Eleanor. She had never recovered, her spirit broken by the loss of her daughter. She died 8 years ago, a part of her always waiting for a child who would never come home. If this was real, she had gone to her grave never knowing the truth. The injustice of it was a fresh wound. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky behind the mountain peaks, painting them in shades of violet and gray, Michael gripped the steering wheel tighter. The landscape was breathtaking, but he saw none of it. His entire world had narrowed to a single objective: get to the address on East Hastings Street. See her with his own eyes. No. He bypassed Vancouver's city center, his GPS leading him directly to the infamously grim neighborhood. The transition was stark. The sleek glass towers of downtown gave way to crumbling brick buildings, boarded-up windows, and clusters of people huddled in doorways, their postures speaking of defeat and addiction. He felt a clench of fear, not for his own safety, but for the possibility that this was where Jenny had ended up. He found the shelter, a nondescript low-rise building squeezed between a pawn shop and a closed-down diner. The front door was heavy, scarred with graffiti. Taking a deep breath, he pushed it open. The air inside was thick and warm, smelling of bleach, stale sweat, and boiled cabbage. A tired-looking woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Anita sat behind a fortified plexiglass window. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone professionally neutral. I'm looking for someone," Michael said, his voice rough from the long drive and lack of sleep. "She might be staying here. Her name is Jenny, but she might not use that name. She called me early this morning from here." Anita's expression softened slightly. "The one who used the phone around 2 a.m.? Yeah, I remember her. She was very agitated. Said she'd remembered who she was. She asked for privacy, been sitting in the common room all morning, just staring at the wall. Said her brother was coming." She pointed down a hallway. "First door on your left." Michael's heart was a drum in his ears. He walked slowly, each step feeling weighted. The common room was a sad, institutional space with worn linoleum and a few mismatched couches. A television mounted high on the wall played a morning show with the sound off, and then he saw her. She was sitting alone on a hard plastic chair in the corner, her profile to him. Her hair was long and mostly gray, tied back in a messy braid. She wore a faded, oversized jacket and worn-out jeans. Her shoulders were hunched, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was staring at a cracked tile on the floor as if it held the answers to the universe. He stopped a few feet away, his breath catching in his throat. This wasn't the vibrant, laughing 19-year-old he remembered. This woman looked weathered, aged far beyond her 51 years, her face a roadmap of hard living. "Jenny?" he said, the name a prayer on his lips. She turned. Her face was lined, her skin leathered by sun and wind. But then her eyes met his. They were the same hazel green, the same shape, with the same slight downturn at the corners that gave her a perpetually thoughtful look. In that instant, 32 years of grief and doubt collapsed. It was her. It was Jenny. But the moment of recognition was shattered not by a joyful embrace, but by her next heartbreaking words. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I don't remember you." The words, "I'm sorry, I don't remember you," hung in the stale air of the common room, a barrier more solid than any wall. Michael felt the hope that had carried him through the 7-hour drive crumble into dust. He stood frozen, staring at the woman with his sister's eyes, who looked back at him with the blank, wary expression of a stranger. I'm Michael," he said, the introduction feeling absurd and heartbreaking. "Your brother." She nodded slowly, her gaze dropping back to the floor. "I know. The name, it feels right. But the memories, there's nothing." She gestured weakly to the empty chair beside her. "You can sit." He sat, the plastic chair groaning under his weight. He was close enough now to see the fine web of lines around her eyes, the chapped state of her lips, the way her hands, clasped tightly together, were scarred and calloused. These were not the hands of the art student who had loved to sketch landscapes. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where are you watching from. It helps more than you know. He had to be sure. Beyond the eyes, beyond the birthmark she'd confirmed over the phone, he needed something tangible. "Your arm," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You said you had the scar. Can I see it?" Without a word, she pushed up the sleeve of her worn jacket. There on her left forearm was a 4-inch silvery line. It was old and faded, but its placement was identical to the one Jenny had gotten when she'd fallen through a pane of glass in their basement door when she was 12. Michael remembered holding a towel to the gushing wound, trying to be calm for her while his own heart hammered with fear. "It's there," he whispered, his throat tight. "Just like I remember." A flicker of something, curiosity perhaps, crossed her face. "How did it happen?" "You were running in the house, chasing our dog, Buster. You slipped and went right through the basement door window. There was blood everywhere. I was so scared." He saw no spark of recognition in her eyes, just a quiet absorption of the story. "You got 16 stitches. You were so brave. You didn't even cry." She looked at the scar as if seeing it for the first time. "I don't remember that," she said softly. "I don't remember a dog named Buster." The finality in her tone was a fresh wave of grief. He had found her, but he had not found her. The person she had been was truly gone, locked away by 3 decades of trauma and amnesia. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus on the present. "The DNA test," he said. We need to be certain, for both of us. She nodded in agreement. I want to know. I need to know who I am. He found a private lab in downtown Vancouver that offered expedited sibling testing. The process was clinical and swift. Cheek swabs, paperwork, a substantial payment. The technician said results would be ready in 48 hours. As they left the sterile office and stepped back onto the gritty street, the reality of their situation descended once more. What now? She asked, her voice small. I should probably go back to the shelter. Michael looked at her. This fragile, lost woman who was his sister. He thought of the shelter, the grim common room, the hard plastic chair. He thought of the life she had endured while he had a home, a family, a bed. No, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. You're coming with me. I've got a hotel room. You're staying there. The hotel room was a modest one, but to her it might as well have been a palace. She stood just inside the door, hesitant, as if afraid to touch anything. You can take a shower, Michael said, trying to sound normal. There are clean towels. She nodded and disappeared into the bathroom. The sound of the shower running for nearly an hour spoke volumes about the simple luxuries she had been denied. When she emerged, her hair was clean and damp, hanging loose around her shoulders. She had washed her face, and without the grime of the streets, the family resemblance was even more striking. She looked tired and clean and terribly vulnerable. He ordered room service, and they ate a silent meal of sandwiches and soup. The television played news neither of them watched. The chasm between them was vast, filled with 32 years of unknown history. Can you tell me? She asked suddenly, putting down her fork. About before? About me? So he did. He told her about the house with the willow tree in Kelowna, about their mother, Eleanor, and her beautiful singing voice, about their father, a quiet mechanic who had died of a heart attack just 2 years before the crash. He told her about her love for art, how she would spend hours drawing in the backyard, how she had been accepted into the Emily Carr University of Art and Design in Vancouver. He told her about the trip to Whistler with friends that she had been so excited about, the trip she never returned from. As he spoke, he watched her face, searching for any sign of a breakthrough. There was none. She listened with the intense concentration of a student learning a foreign history, her own history. I wish I could remember, she whispered when he finished, her eyes glistening with tears that were for a stranger's life. She sounds lovely? You were, Michael thought, his heart breaking. You were lovely. That night he lay awake in the dark hotel room, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing from the other bed. He had found his sister, but he was sharing a room with a ghost. The DNA results would tell him what he already knew in his heart, but they couldn't tell him how to bridge the impossible gap between the brother and the sister who was now a stranger. The next morning, a sharp knock on the hotel room door shattered the uneasy peace. When Michael opened it, he found 2 stern-faced police officers waiting. Their questions about a cold case threatening to tear his newly found sister away before they even had the chance to know each other. The knock was sharp, official, and entirely out of place in the muted atmosphere of the hotel corridor. Michael, who had been sipping bitter coffee from a small machine, froze. Jenny, sitting on the edge of her bed, flinched as if struck, her eyes widening with a deep, instinctual fear. The comfortable silence they had managed to build over a quiet breakfast shattered. Who is that? She whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know, Michael said, his own pulse quickening. He moved to the door and looked through the peephole. 2 uniformed police officers, a man and a woman, stood there, their expressions neutral and professional. His mind raced. Had Jenny done something? Was this about the shelter? He took a steadying breath and opened the door. Michael Reed? The female officer asked. Yes. Can I help you? We'd like to ask you a few questions, the male officer said, his gaze shifting past Michael into the room where Jenny sat rigid on the bed. It's regarding a cold case, the 1992 Sea to Sky highway bus accident. Michael felt the floor lurch beneath him. He had been so focused on the miracle of Jenny being alive, he hadn't considered the legal and bureaucratic nightmare her resurrection would trigger. The body they buried had a name on the headstone. A death certificate had been filed. Her life had been legally erased. Of course, Michael said, stepping aside to let them in. The room suddenly felt impossibly small. The female officer, whose badge identified her as Constable Sharma, nodded politely to Jenny. And you are, ma'am? Jenny looked at Michael, a silent plea in her eyes. He gave a slight, reassuring nod. Jennifer Reed, she said, the name still sounding unfamiliar on her tongue. Constable Sharma's partner, Constable Evans, didn't miss a beat. That's a name we haven't heard in a long time. Our records indicate Jennifer Reed was one of the fatalities in that accident. There was a mistake, Michael interjected, his voice firm. A terrible mistake. I identified the wrong body. This is my sister. The two officers exchanged a glance that was a mixture of skepticism and profound curiosity. That's a very serious claim, Mr. Reed, Constable Sharma said. We're going to need to verify that. We're waiting on the results of a DNA test, Michael explained. They'll be ready tomorrow. That will certainly help, Constable Evans said, his tone softening slightly. But in the meantime, we have a problem. A death certificate was issued. A body was buried. If that wasn't your sister, then we have an unidentified Jane Doe in a marked grave, and a live person who has been legally dead for over 3 decades. This opens a significant investigation. The reality of their words settled heavily on Michael. This wasn't just a family matter. It was a jurisdictional tangle involving coroner's offices, vital statistics, and potentially a homicide investigation if the wrong body was misidentified. Ms. Reed, Constable Sharma said, turning her attention to Jenny. Can you tell us anything about the time immediately after the accident? Anything at all about where you've been? Jenny shook her head. Her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. I don't remember the crash. I don't remember anything from before about 10 years ago. I woke up in a hospital. They said I was found on the street. I didn't know who I was. The officers took notes. Which hospital? Constable Evans asked. I don't remember. It was so long ago, everything is a blur until recently. The questioning continued for another 20 minutes. They asked Michael about the identification process all those years ago, and he recounted the grim details of the morgue, the shock, the distorted features. He felt a fresh wave of guilt with every word. The officers were thorough but not unkind. They could see the raw emotional truth of the situation. Finally, they stood to leave. We'll need official copies of that DNA report as soon as you have it, Constable Sharma said, handing Michael her card. And we'll likely need to speak with you both again. This is a very unusual situation. After they left, the room was steeped in a new, heavy silence. The temporary bubble of the hotel room had been popped. The outside world, with all its rules and records, had intruded. They think I'm a problem, Jenny said quietly, not looking at him. No, Michael said, sitting beside her. They're just doing their job. It's a puzzle they have to solve. We all have to solve it. But what if they don't believe us? What if they think I'm an imposter? Or what if I did something wrong during all those years I can't remember? The fear in her voice was palpable. The fear of someone who had learned to expect the worst from authority. Then we'll deal with it, Michael said with a conviction he didn't fully feel. Together, you're my sister. That's the only fact that matters now. He knew it wasn't that simple. The path ahead was fraught with legal hurdles, bureaucratic red tape, and the relentless scrutiny of a reopened cold case. But seeing the terror in Jenny's eyes, he knew his role hadn't changed since they were kids. He was her big brother. His job was to protect her, even from the ghosts of her own past. And now, from the complicated system that had written her off as dead, he needed help. He needed someone who understood trauma and could vouch for Jenny's mental state. He remembered her mentioning a doctor at a free clinic. Jenny, he said gently, you mentioned a doctor who was helping you, Dr. Sharma. We should go see her. She might be able to help us navigate this. Jenny looked up, a flicker of hope in her eyes. Dr. Alicia Sharma. Yes, she's kind. She might know what to do. But when they arrived at the free clinic, they discovered Dr. Sharma was gone. And the reason for her sudden departure sent a new chill down Michael's spine. The free clinic was a stark contrast to the private lab they had visited the day before. Located in a repurposed storefront, it was crowded, underfunded, and hummed with a quiet desperation. The air smelled of antiseptic and damp coats. Michael felt out of place in his clean jacket, acutely aware of the sidelong glances from others in the waiting room. Jenny, however, seemed to shrink into herself, her shoulders hunching as if the environment triggered a deep-seated muscle memory of hardship. They approached the front desk, manned by a harried-looking volunteer. "We're here to see Dr. Alicia Sharma," Michael said. The volunteer, a young woman with tired eyes, didn't even look up from her computer. "Dr. Sharma doesn't work here anymore." The statement hit Michael with an unexpected force. "What? Since when?" "She left. Last week. It was pretty sudden." The volunteer finally glanced up, her expression softening slightly when she saw Jenny's distraught face. "I'm sorry. Is there something I can help you with? We have another doctor on duty." "This was urgent," Michael insisted, a knot of frustration tightening in his chest. "It's about a long-term patient, my sister. Dr. Sharma was helping her." The volunteer sighed, a sound of someone who had delivered too much bad news. "I really am sorry. All I know is she resigned. She didn't say where she was going. You could try contacting the Vancouver Health Authority, but I doubt they'll tell you anything. Privacy rules." Defeated, Michael led Jenny back outside into the damp Vancouver air. The loss of Dr. Sharma felt like a profound setback. She had been a potential anchor, a professional who could verify Jenny's state of mind and her long-standing amnesia to the authorities. Now, she was just another ghost. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you are watching from. It helps more than you know. He was about to suggest they return to the hotel to wait for the DNA results when his phone buzzed in his pocket. The screen showed a number he didn't recognize, but it was a local area code. His heart stuttered. Was it the lab? The police? "Michael Reed speaking. Mr. Reed, this is Constable Evans. We've done some preliminary digging based on our conversation." The officer's tone was carefully neutral. "We've confirmed a John Doe admission to St. Paul's Hospital in February of 2013 that loosely matches what your sister described. Found unconscious, no identification, suffering from exposure and signs of prior head trauma. The patient was discharged into a shelter system when their physical health stabilized." Michael's grip on the phone tightened. "So you believe her?" "We believe the facts line up with 8's story," Evans corrected cautiously. "The DNA will tell us if it's her story. We also pulled the original coroner's report from '92. He paused, and the silence on the line felt heavy. "The initial report noted the body you identified had a previously healed fracture in the right clavicle. Did your sister have such an injury?" Michael's mind raced, flipping through a mental catalog of childhood scrapes and breaks. "No, never. Jenny broke her left wrist falling from a tree when she was 10, but never her collarbone." "That's what we needed to hear," Evans said, and Michael could almost hear the pieces clicking into place for the officer. It was a minor note in the file, easily overlooked in the context of massive trauma, but it's a discrepancy. It supports your claim. A wave of relief so powerful it made him lightheaded washed over Michael. It wasn't just in his head. There was a paper trail, however faint, that pointed toward the truth. "Thank you, Constable. The DNA results will be the clincher," Evans reiterated. "Keep us posted." The line went dead. Michael turned to Jenny, who was watching him with wide, anxious eyes. "They found a record," he told her, his voice thick with emotion. "From a hospital in 2013. It's you. And the body from the crash, and it had a broken collarbone you never had. They believe us, Jenny." For the first time, a genuine, unguarded emotion broke through the constant veil of fear on her face. It wasn't joy, not yet, but a profound, trembling relief. A single tear traced a path through the fine lines on her cheek. "So it's real," she breathed. "I'm really me." Later that afternoon, back in the hotel room, the call came. The lab technician's voice was calm and professional. "Mr. Reed, the results of your sibling DNA analysis are complete. The probability of siblingship between you and the Borsium second party is 99.98%. The result is conclusive." He thanked her, ended the call, and looked at Jenny, who was sitting on the edge of her bed, clutching a pillow to her chest. "It's you," he said, the simplicity of the words belying the seismic shift they represented. "You're Jenny Reed, my sister." She didn't say anything. She just let out a long, shuddering sigh, as if she had been holding her breath for 32 years. Then she began to cry, deep, racking sobs that shook her entire frame. Michael crossed the room and sat beside her, putting a tentative arm around her shoulders. This time, she didn't flinch. She leaned into him and they sat there together, two siblings mourning the lost decades and embracing the impossible miracle of a second chance. The ghost had finally officially come back to life. But their moment of closure was short-lived. A new email from the DNA lab contained an unexpected attachment. A detailed ancestry report that revealed a genetic secret their family had kept buried even longer than the crash itself. The confirmation should have been the end of it. The circle should have closed. But the universe, it seemed, had one more seismic shock in store. The email from the DNA lab arrived an hour after the phone call, with the subject line, "Your full report and ancestry analysis." Michael opened it almost as an afterthought, expecting to see the sterile, scientific data they'd already received over the phone. He skimmed the first page, the confirmation of siblingship, the statistical certainty. Then he clicked on the attached PDF titled Ancestral Breakdown. It was a series of colorful pie charts and geographic maps tracing their genetic heritage. He was about to close it, dismissing it as irrelevant, when a specific line of text caught his eye. Paternal haplogroup analysis. Inconclusive for stated sibling relationship. He frowned, reading it again. He wasn't a geneticist, but the words paternal and inconclusive in the same sentence sent a cold trickle of unease down his spine. He scrolled further, his heart beginning to hammer anew. There, in blunt clinical language, was the explanation. While the autosomal DNA confirms a full sibling-level genetic match with a 99.98% probability, the analysis of Y chromosome DNA, passed exclusively from father to son, and X chromosome inheritance patterns indicates a genetic variance inconsistent with sharing the same biological father. The results are instead conclusive for a maternal half-sibling relationship. The world tilted. The air left his lungs. Maternal half-sibling. He read the paragraph 3 times, the words blurring and sharpening with each pass. He and Jenny shared a mother, but not a father. The man he had called Dad, the quiet mechanic who had raised them both, was not Jenny's biological father. "Michael, what is it?" Jenny's voice was small, concerned by the sudden stark pallor of his face. He couldn't speak. He just turned the laptop screen toward her. He watched as her eyes scanned the text, her brow furrowed in confusion before clearing into dawning comprehension. Her hand flew to her mouth. "We have different fathers?" she whispered, the revelation seeming to root her to the spot. All the small, half-remembered moments from their childhood suddenly rearranged themselves in Michael's mind with a terrible, clicking clarity. The occasional, uncharacteristic tension between his parents. The way his mother would sometimes look at Jenny with an expression of such intense, almost pained love. The fact that Jenny, with her lighter hair and more delicate features, had never really looked like the rest of the family. They had simply said she took after their mother's side. Their mother, Eleanor, had taken a secret to her grave, a secret far older and deeper than the bus crash. "This changes nothing," Michael said, his voice rough with emotion. He closed the laptop with a definitive snap. "You are my sister. That is a fact. This is just biology." But he could see the new storm of confusion in her eyes. She had just reclaimed one identity only to have another fundamental part of it ripped away. Who was her father? Did her mother, their mother, ever intend to tell her? Did he know? "The man I remembered as Dad," Jenny began, her voice trembling. "Was your dad," Michael finished firmly. "In every way that mattered. He loved you. He raised you. He taught you to ride a bike. He grieved for you when you were gone. That doesn't change. But there's another man out there," she persisted. The reporter in her, the seeker of truth starting to emerge from the ashes of her amnesia. "A man who is half of me. Does he know I exist? Did he want me?" The questions hung in the air, unanswerable. The mystery of Jenny's life had just doubled in size. It wasn't just about the 32 lost years. It was now about the very origin of her life. Driven by a new, urgent need for answers, Michael spent the next 2 hours on the phone. He called the lab, who confirmed their analysis was definitive. He called Constable Evans, who listened to the new development with a low whistle. "That complicates the family side of things, but it doesn't change our investigation into the crash," he'd said. "One thing at a time, Mr. Reed." Finally, using the detailed ancestry report, Michael created an account on the DNA database. It allowed users to connect with genetic relatives who had also used the service. He input their data, his stomach a tight knot. Almost immediately, the screen populated with a list of distant cousins' third and fourth matches. And then, he saw it. At the top of the list, with a match percentage labeled Close Family First Cousin, was a name, Henry Walker. He clicked on the profile. It was sparse, but it listed a location, Sechilt, British Columbia, a coastal town just a few hours away, by ferry. This wasn't a distant relative. This was someone who shared a significant amount of DNA with Jenny. A first cousin would share a set of grandparents. But given their new half-sibling status, the math pointed to a more direct connection. Jenny, Michael said, turning the screen to her once more. I think we may have just found your father's family. She stared at the name, Henry Walker, as if it were a ghost stepping out of the fog, her real father's nephew. A living, breathing connection to the other half of her bloodline. The search for the lost sister was over. A new search was just beginning. With a name and a location, Michael decided there was only one thing to do, go to Sechilt. But the man who answered the door of the small weathered house wasn't the cousin they expected, but an elderly man who took one look at Jenny and whispered, Eleanor, but that's impossible. The man standing in the doorway of the small weathered house in Sechilt was ancient. His back stooped and his hands gnarled with arthritis. But his eyes, a pale, watery blue, were sharp and clear. They were fixed on Jenny, wide with a shock so profound it seemed to momentarily stop his heart. The name Eleanor hung in the salty coastal air between them, a ghost he had clearly never laid to rest. Michael stepped forward slightly, placing a protective hand on Jenny's arm. I'm sorry, sir. This isn't Eleanor. My name is Michael Reed. This is my sister, Jenny. We're looking for Henry Walker. The old man blinked, his gaze slowly pulling away from Jenny's face, which was a mirror of the woman he'd known decades ago. He looked at Michael, comprehension dawning, followed by a fresh wave of astonishment. Henry's my son, he said, his voice a dry rasp. I'm Arthur Walker. And you? He looked back at Jenny, his expression softening into something akin to awe. You must be Eleanor's girl. My God. We never thought... Come in. Please, come in. He shuffled back, beckoning them into a cozy, cluttered living room that smelled of old books and wood smoke. Photographs covered every surface. Generations of walkers smiling from silver frames. Arthur lowered himself slowly into a worn armchair, his eyes never leaving Jenny. Eleanor, he breathed, almost to himself. She was a summer girl. Came up here to work at the lodge in '69. My son, Joseph. He was a poet, a dreamer. A sad smile touched his lips. They were inseparable that summer, but she was from the interior, had a life back there. She left at the end of August. Joe was heartbroken. He never really got over it. He looked directly at Jenny, his eyes glistening. He never knew about you, child. She never told him. A few years later, we got a Christmas card from her. She'd married a man named Reed. She looked happy. We thought that was the end of it. He shook his head in wonder. Joe passed away 5 years ago, cancer. He always wondered what happened to her. The revelation settled over the room. Jenny's biological father wasn't the cousin Henry. It was his uncle Joseph, Arthur's son, a poet who had died never knowing he had a daughter. Jenny sat perfectly still, absorbing the story of her own origin, a story that had been lost to time and circumstance. He would have loved to know you, Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. He talked about her until the very end. Said she was the one who got away. He pointed a trembling finger at a photograph on the mantelpiece. That's him. That's your father. Jenny stood and walked to the photograph. It showed a young man with kind eyes and a mop of dark hair, leaning against a sailboat, smiling freely at the camera. She reached out and gently touched the glass over his face. I have his smile, she whispered, and in that moment a piece of her fractured identity clicked into place. It wasn't a memory, but a recognition, a genetic truth. Arthur insisted they stay for tea. He told them stories about Joseph, about his love for the ocean and his hopelessness with tools, about the volumes of poetry he'd published locally. It was a gift, a history handed to Jenny to fill a void she didn't even know she had. She wasn't just the product of a tragic accident and lost years. She was also the daughter of a dreamer who loved the sea. As they prepared to leave, Arthur took Jenny's hands in his own, his grip surprisingly strong. You are a walker, he said firmly. This is your family too now. You come back any time. I have so much more to tell you. The drive back to the ferry was quiet, but the silence was different now. It was contemplative, filled with the weight of a new narrative. Jenny stared out at the passing landscape, a new sense of wholeness beginning to settle over her. Are you okay? Michael asked gently. She nodded slowly. It's a lot, but it's good. It's another part of the puzzle. I had a father who loved my mother. I have a grandfather. She looked at Michael, her eyes clear for the first time since he'd found her. And I have a brother who drove across the province to find me. I'm starting to feel like I belong somewhere. Back in Kelowna, the process of rebuilding a life began in earnest. Michael and Claire converted their den into a permanent bedroom for Jenny. She started therapy to process the dual traumas of the crash and her lost decades. The police investigation into the misidentification proceeded slowly in the background, a bureaucratic formality now that the DNA evidence was irrefutable. Michael watched as the wary, haunted woman from the shelter slowly began to emerge from her shell. She started helping Claire in the garden, her artist's eye naturally guiding her. She began to draw again, tentative sketches at first, then more confident landscapes that eerily echoed the coastal scenery of Seychelles. One evening she showed Michael a drawing she'd done from memory, a detailed sketch of the old house with the willow tree from their childhood. I remember the swing, she said softly, pointing to a detail in the drawing he hadn't even noticed. The one Dad built for us. The rope was always fraying and he'd always be fixing it. Michael felt a lump form in his throat. It was her first clear, unprompted memory of their shared past. It wasn't a grand revelation, just a simple domestic detail, but it was a beginning. The fortress of her amnesia had its first crack. But just as a fragile peace was settling over the Reed household, a certified letter arrived from a lawyer in Vancouver. The estate of the late Joseph Walker was seeking to officially recognize Jennifer Reed as his sole heir. The certified letter felt heavy in Michael's hands, its weight belying the thinness of the paper. The return address, a prestigious law firm in Vancouver, sent a jolt of apprehension through him. He brought it to Jenny, who was in the garden, her hands buried in the soil, tending to the fledgling plants with a quiet focus he'd come to admire. It's for you, he said, holding it out. She wiped her hands on her jeans, her expression wary. The sight of official correspondence still triggered a flicker of fear in her eyes. She slit the envelope open carefully and read the contents, her face unreadable. After a moment, she handed it to him. It was from the executor of Joseph Walker's estate. Based on the DNA evidence and the sworn affidavit from Arthur Walker, the court was prepared to formally recognize Jennifer Reed as the biological daughter and sole heir of the late poet. The estate wasn't a fortune, but it was significant. The small house in Seychelles, the royalties from his published works, and a modest investment portfolio. He wants to give me a house, Jenny whispered, her voice full of disbelief. A man I never met, whose face I only know from a photograph. He's your father, Jenny, Michael said softly. It's not about the money or the house. It's about acknowledgement. It's his way of providing for you even after he's gone. The legal process that followed was a surreal counterpoint to their quiet life in Kelowna. There were more forms. A court appearance for Jenny to formally establish her legal identity. A bizarre hearing where a judge declared a person, alive and present in the room, to be legally alive once more. Through it all, Michael was at her side, her steadfast anchor in a sea of bureaucratic absurdity. With the estate settled, they took a trip to Seychelles. The small house by the water was just as Arthur had described it, filled with the lingering spirit of Joseph Walker. Books of poetry lined the shelves and handwritten notes were tucked into drawers. It was a quiet, peaceful place. Jenny walked through the room slowly, running her fingers over her father's desk, gazing out at the same view of the ocean that had inspired his writing. I think I'd like to keep it, she said to Michael. Not to live in, not yet anyway, but to have, to come to. It feels like a part of me. He understood. It was a tangible connection to the father she never knew, a root reaching into soil she never knew she had. Back in Kelowna, life began to find its new, normal rhythm. Jenny's memories didn't come flooding back in a dramatic wave, but in gentle, persistent tides. A song on the radio would bring back the image of their mother humming in the kitchen. The smell of rain on dry earth would trigger a vivid memory of playing in the backyard after a storm. She started volunteering at a local community center, teaching a small informal art class to seniors. The act of teaching, of sharing her passion, seemed to solidify something within her. One evening, they were all in the backyard. Michael, Claire, Jenny, and Michael's children who were visiting for the weekend. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the lawn. Jenny was laughing at something Michael's grandson said, her face relaxed and open, the years of hardship seeming to soften in the evening light. Michael watched her, a profound sense of peace settling over him. The ghost had been laid to rest. In her place was a woman, his sister, still scarred, still healing but whole. She was building a new life, not on the ashes of the old one, but alongside it, incorporating the lost girl she had been with the resilient survivor she had become. The mystery of the bus crash was solved. The mystery of her paternity was solved. The grave in the Kelowna cemetery still bore her name, a testament to a tragic mistake. They had decided to leave it, a memorial to the girl they thought they lost, and to the unknown young woman whose family had perhaps been grieving for her all this time somewhere. The past would always be a country of grief and wonder, of tragedy and miracle, but the future, for the first time in 32 years, was simply the future. It was a gift neither of them had ever expected to receive. Jenny caught him looking and smiled, a real easy smile that reached her eyes. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said, returning the smile. "I'm just glad you're here." And he was. Despite everything, the pain, the confusion, the bureaucratic nightmares, the shocking revelations, he was grateful. His sister had come back from the dead, and in doing so, she had taught him that even after the deepest winter, a fragile, resilient spring can always find a way to break through. Subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where are you watching from. It helps more than you know.